You got us? Great.
No,
Yep.
thank you.
Starting up. There we go. Cool. Welcome, everybody, to Actionable Advocacy, and welcome to our virtual summit. Thank you to our sponsors, Offbeat Travel, Pick LJ, Explore Brookhaven, Miles Partnership, Visit Lauderdale, and Visit Greater Palm Springs. We'd love for your cameras to be on, and if you're not speaking, for your microphones to be off. If you have questions or comments, we'll have those in the chat. Tami and I will be looking at those over the course of the session today together. And we have one more day of the virtual summit tomorrow. Pass it over to Tami.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Yeah, so the chat's open. Please introduce yourself, where you're from, both in the travel space and the world. And I just have to give a shout out to collectively send some extra love to any of our friends here that are impacted by the aftermath of Hurricane Helene and or in the path of Hurricane Milton, and really people around the world. So yeah, my name is Tami Fairweather, and I'm a media relations, communications, and events consultant and a freelance travel writer. I specialize in cross-cultural, sustainable, and nature-based travel and tourism. And my home base is in my chosen home of New Orleans, which shout out to the last panel. It was originally an indigenous trade hub called Bulbancha, which in Choctaw means a place of many tongues, before it was colonized by France in 1718, as France has founded. Thank you for being here. Thanks for taking the time to be present here and now and in the future, if you're watching this on a later timeline. What we have here for today's Actionable Advocacy panel is a gathering of incredible experts to share insights and tangible actions for us to take in our professional, our organizational, and our personal lives, and our roles that can make meaningful differences for marginalized communities and individuals. So I'm going to start by having our panelists introduce themselves. Then we're going to have a few questions and we'll get into a conversation. So it's a very expansive conversation. One more note, just be active in the chat. Feel free to keep your cameras on, if off, if that's not comfortable, and write questions along the way. If relevant to the topic at hand, we may pull in a question or save it to the end for Q&A, like Ronnie said. So I am gonna say, again, we're honored and grateful for the time and expertise of these panelists, and I'm gonna ask you to introduce yourselves now, what you do, what organization you're associated with, and your why it's important to you. And I'll start with Rob.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Rob Hill, pronouns are he, I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. I've been a lifelong Mississippian with the exception of a couple of little stints. One in went to grad school in North Carolina, but largely been in the South, and a little bit of a small amount of time in New York, but almost all in Mississippi. I'm the I was the state director for 10 years for the Human Rights Campaign. I'm now moving into a new role where I am I'm a regional campaign director for Mississippi, Louisiana, and West Virginia. So that's my new role. I'm still having to remember to that's my new role, that I need to include that when I introduce myself. But yeah, based here in Jackson, Mississippi. And if you don't know about the Human Rights Campaign, if you see that that sign, that logo, you see that on people's cars a lot. But that's our logo. We're the nation's largest LGBTQ plus civil rights organization, working for equality. And so that's what I do. I advocate. I advocate wherever I can, whether it be in corporations, with tourism folks, with in colleges, universities, any other institutions, to one, embody policies that they have, but also enact policies that protect LGBTQ plus people. And I do a lot of lobbying, obviously, with legislators, because that's where laws are changed, and for the good or for better or for worse. Unfortunately, a lot of times worse in those states that I mentioned for LGBTQ plus people. The reason I do it, I'm a gay man. I'm not, I don't leave my work at the office. I take it with me. I'm advocating for myself and others in the LGBTQ plus community. So I take the work very personally, and it's an honor to be a part of this today, and to see so many of you giving attention to this. And I'll let Tami. I don't know who was next, but I know you do.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, Marty, I invite you to go next.
Hey everybody, I'm Martinique Lewis. I want to apologize in advance. I am fried. My brain is fried. We have a event happening this weekend in the Fort Lauderdale area, and obviously with the current weather situation, it has caused a lot of, I don't want to say drama because it's not drama, but it has caused us to spring into action as quickly and as well as we can to try to navigate the situation. So it has been a rough 72 hours. I just landed in the Fort Lauderdale area. And like I said, my brain is fried, but I promise I will give you guys the best that I can give you as of right now. But you'll probably be like, oh my gosh, this is so not like Marty with her super energetic self. But like I said, I'll give you everything I can. So anyways, Martinique Lewis, I am a diversity and travel consultant. I've been doing that for 8 years. You might say, what the hell is that? Well, it is something that I made up on my own because 8 years ago, that title wasn't there. But my main function has always been to help raise awareness about marginalized communities, about underrepresented communities in the travel space, and teach destinations how to connect culturally with them. I do serve as a co-founder and the current president of the Black Travel Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization that was started to support Black travel media. I additionally am the host of National Geographic's Black Travel Across America. If you have Disney Plus or if you have Hulu or Nat Geo, you can watch it. I'm additionally the creator, like they said, of the ABC Travel Green Book and the ABC Travel Green Book app. And we're the #1 digital resource connecting destinations to Black travelers and the African diaspora globally. So what does that mean? Similarly, the same thing I said before. We help destinations connect directly with Black travelers on the ground, but even more so with businesses in their destination so that we can bridge that gap. We help Black travelers specifically locate Black-owned businesses, communities, and events on 6 out of 7 continents. And if any of you are familiar with the Negro Motorist Green Book, we are similar to that, except we are global. I love what I do. I love being able to advocate for people in this space. And there's so many people that are on this call that I love and adore. And I'm just so glad that we've been able to all come together. So thank you for having me. And sorry if I go on and off camera, but as you can imagine, my phone is ringing off the hook every 5 seconds trying to navigate this situation.
That's okay. We got you. Thank you. Polly?
Hi, my name's Polly Tribble. I'm the Director of Disability Rights Mississippi. I'm also in Jackson. And we're the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Mississippi. Every state has a protection and advocacy system. We were set up to protect the rights of people with disabilities. I'm going to put in the chat a website that you can go to find out where your state's P&A is. There are 57 of us in every state. I know that doesn't equal the right number of states, but there's one in the District of Columbia, the Native American community, and the territories. So we're all part of a national group called Disability Rights Mississippi. And my why is I'm passionate about our work. I've been doing it most of my adult life, but I'm getting older. And so I know that, I mean, we know from the Center for Disease Control that there's a 1 in 7 chance that people will develop a disability before they retire. And there's reasons for that. And that disabilitycanhappen.com talks about a 20-year-old has a 1 in 4 chance of having a disability before they retire. So a lot of us are looking at that. Now, there's reason to suspect that those statistics were put out there by insurance companies selling short-term and long-term disability policies. But the reality is that disability can happen to anyone. So that's my why, and that's why I'm passionate about the work that we do.
Beautiful. Thank you. What a deep panel. We got a lot of information to go over. So yeah, my first question is, as for us, the audience here, as professional members of communities and organizations, both big and small, what are some ways we can advocate for the populations and identities that you're focused on? This could be in the workplace with our colleagues working on initiatives within tourism, because I know some of us are in tourism, some aren't, as members of our own communities and as travelers, general travelers. So Marty, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to speak for everybody, not just Black travelers, but in general. I mean, the main thing we always need to do is understand our privilege and understand bias. And obviously, to most of the people on here, I don't have to say that, but to the average person, they don't think about others and what they go through when they're traveling. For example, Muslim travelers, the anxiety they feel before they go through TSA. Like I always share with you guys, for plus size travelers, the anxiety they feel just going through a regular doorway. Trans travelers, what they feel like when they have to check into a hotel and their, ID doesn't match what they look like, or even them having to hold their bowels because they don't want to choose the wrong bathroom to go into. So all of these things are just top of mind awareness for everybody. And obviously we'll get into intersectionality after, but understanding people's social class, understanding people's religions, understanding people's sexuality, and how you are faced with that when you are traveling. Specifically Black travelers, one thing we like to focus on a lot when I'm talking is just about us being able to connect culturally and safely in any destination, but the advocacy part is real. And Nai is on here and is very interesting. And I love Nai and what she does because she's able to see a lot of these things firsthand. But I was in Colombia maybe last month. I can't remember because I travel so much, but last month sounds correct. Maybe September, could have been August. But Pro Colombia brought me out there for something called the Petronio Alvarez Festival. And it is the largest celebration of Afro-Colombians in that country, and nobody here knows about it. And so I told them I'm not coming unless I can talk to the government and the tourism. And because of the language barrier, when I walked into the meeting room, Nai was there. And I was so happy to see her because I was like, Nai, what are you doing here? But she was a translator between myself and a Black tour guide. After the conversation, I realized that they asked the Black tour guide to come in, but they did not pay him for that. And for me, that was really big. And why? Because you had to take him out of his own situation to make sure that you looked good in front of company, the company being me. And so when you advocate for people in these spaces, and specifically for these tour guides who might look different, and not just Black, but this happens with Native Americans all the time when you go anywhere, right? It's, did you pay them for their services? And for me, that's really, really important. And I feel like this is something that all of you guys can take back and go to your specific organizations. But when you're asking somebody to come in and give their knowledge and expertise, which is something you can't do, because if you could, you wouldn't ask them to come in, they need to be paid for that. So in my opinion, that's just one way that people can start thinking about how can we show up for people and advocate for people. Ask your organizations, did you pay that person to come here and talk, to come here and speak? And so me having then to go back to them and say, don't ever bring him out here again without giving him payment, and then telling them, sending them an invoice saying, because I gave him the money that you should have given him for an hour of their time, and then them understanding how critical and how important that is. I feel like that's one way that you can show up and advocate for people in your spaces.
Great. Yeah. Economy as sustainability. People need to be sustained by money. Yeah. Very good point. I like it. Polly.
Well, I actually think Marty could do a great job with covering everything, and I can't imagine you at 100% because you are 100% now. So I think that's great. And in that same vein, as far as disabilities, we have to remember that not all disabilities are visible. Some are obvious, some are not. And so as we're traveling or just living in our community, start to notice the areas that might be problematic for people with disabilities. Like, let's say, for instance, somebody with a visual impairment. In your community, sidewalks without a raised pavement to tell them that they're fixing to run into an intersection. I mean, that's a big deal. And like an elevator at an airport or anywhere that doesn't have sound to alert them on what floor they're on. That's a big deal too. So I think just putting yourself in other people's shoes and realizing, hey, if I have no vision, what does this look like as a traveler and as a person who lives in the community? And then probably more obvious is physical impairments. We unfortunately see in Mississippi old buildings, old courthouses that don't have elevators. They have steep stairs. And Rob can tell you too, in Jackson, we also have sidewalks that are uneven and then just stop. And so somebody that is using public transit who's in a chair can't access that. So I think it behooves all of us to notice those things, because moms with strollers, citizens that are on their bikes or scooters, they need smooth sidewalks too. And so I think also, as you live in your own community, we need to encourage universal design. And what I mean by that is everybody's walking on a flat surface. The ramp's not over to the side, and you go up the steps and the person in a chair is segregated. Everybody's entering the museum or the theater the same way. And so I wish and pray for that community. So also, when you see your community redoing roads, then they also have to, if there's a sidewalk, they also have to update the sidewalk. So that's a perfect time for us to be active community members to make sure the city council or the county administrators are doing the right thing. Because I would like to believe that everybody wants people with disabilities to have those things that make it easier for them, but sometimes they don't think. And I know when I started doing this work, it does make you think, but it's a conscious effort to do that. So that's kind of my pitch there on a call to action is we just need to notice things around us, whether you're traveling, because just think about if you've ever traveled in the Atlanta airport, there are elevators, but there may not be that easy to find. And so, it's that kind of stuff that, and sometimes just kind of like Marty was talking about, we have to be their voice, because sometimes people with disabilities are, and maybe other marginalized groups are not going to take up for themselves. And so that's kind of what our organization does. And then we try to get them to be their own advocates so that, if they go somewhere the next time, it's like, put a sign there that says, here's the elevator, that kind of thing.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Polly. In the last panel, we were talking about that too, and just that we can look out for each other in our, for all of us can think of three to a dozen places we could be advocating for that just personally as we're moving through the world and in communities and spaces we create.
Right.
Thank you. That's great. Rob?
Yeah, this is great. Polly and I are friends, and we've been on numerous panels together as our work intersects. And so, but I was thinking about, my previous role was I was a United Methodist minister for 12 years here in Mississippi, and I had left because I wanted to live openly gay as a gay man and live with my partner Ryan. And we're still together 16 years later. But anyway, but I think about this is sort of a very tangible thing that we did when I was a pastor. But it's also a metaphor, I think, for so many things. But we had a fellow, Scott Crawford, who Polly knows very well, who was started coming to my church, and because he could access it, and he could get from his house in his chair to the church. And Scott not only brought himself, but he brought his friends. And so we had this issue where we had they were in the aisle, which is a fire hazard. And if they weren't in the aisle, they were in the very back, which is where we had put them. Mainly older people, because, as I remember one of my professors said, Polly, and you probably heard me say this, that we are all temporarily able-bodied, so for those folks that were in wheelchairs, largely elderly people. But we just came up with the idea, why are we putting them in the aisle? Why are we putting them in the back, or relegating them to the back? So we cut out in the center of the congregation the part of the pews, so that you could sit within the congregation, within the pews next to your loved ones who aren't disabled. And it was just a really beautiful thing. And some people, thought it was ugly, but it was really beautiful once you got to see the people in there, to be fully, enveloped into the congregation and the life of the congregation. And so, like I said, that's a tangible thing that we did to bring people in, bring people space, taking them away from the back and bring them in. And I think that's what, obviously that's a metaphor that we can use in any industry, certainly in tourism. But yeah, what can we do? What tangible things? Well, obviously having a thing like this, having folks who are experts or advocates within these places. And I think, like I was telling Tami, I was telling Ronnie the other day that, in December, I'm going to serve on a panel that the Greater Jackson Chamber's doing around diversity, equity, inclusion, where you see so many people a small group of people who are really loud, pushing back at corporations around DEI. You know, here's the Greater Jackson, area chamber addressing it, making it important, and talking specifically about LGBTQ plus inclusion and what that means. But and it's also just showing up. It meant a lot when we had our Capital City Pride here a few weeks ago, to have Jackson Tourism sponsoring it there, handing out water, having rainbow flags, and celebrating our LGBTQ plus community, because in Jackson, this is the largest concentration of LGBTQ plus people. I like to say we are blue dot in a very red state. But and also just advocating for policy. We'll talk about that a little bit in another question around, sometimes it's seen as political, but it means a lot when tourism folks, when others come out in support of non-discrimination protections. One of the things that happened here in Jackson, we had been working with the Jackson City Council to pass a fully inclusive non-discrimination ordinance that says that you can't discriminate, in places of public accommodation like a restaurant or hotel, or you can't, fire somebody because they're LGBTQ plus, or for any aspect, that anything that's covered under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, race, religion, all that, but also sexual orientation, gender identity, and you can't deny someone housing because of their characteristics or who they are. And we had been going back and forth on that, and then I think it was I should know this date by heart, but June 11th, 2016, when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, which is at the time the largest massacre, and it was attacking the LGBTQ plus community. And after 2 days later, all the talk just went away, because the council said we need to do something tangible to let LGBTQ plus people know that they have a place in this community, that they're safe. And Jackson became the first city to pass a local non-discrimination ordinance in 2016, which was a silver lining in a very dark cloud as a result of the shooting. So we did that, and as a result of that, we worked with tourism groups in other communities to support local non-discrimination laws. Because as an LGBTQ plus person, I like to travel where I'm wanted. I like to spend money where I'm wanted. I want to, I told Tami I went down to New Orleans and had a gay old time last weekend because I love New Orleans, and I feel safe there. I feel welcome, and I feel wanted. And so, New Orleans has done a lot, to be that, embracing place in a state that doesn't send that message very often from the legislature. So we can talk about some other things that we can do policy wise, but I'll stop there. And yeah, you found out I'm a preacher, so I start preaching. So
it's a great segue, yeah, because that is my next question about legislation. what we could be aware of when it comes to legislation related to the populations each of you are focused on. Obviously, intersectionality is already here and present. But is there something we could be pushing for when it comes to making sure our elected officials are doing the right thing? And with that, you know, we're all challenged. Are there ways to do it in spaces where the work, as we all know, that we're doing might be receiving pushback or deemed too political? I know that's a loaded question, but we're just looking to see what advice you might have for us to help.
Who is that question to?
Well, Rob, if you want to, if that helps segue with the next thing that you're going to say.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I think a lot of times we get pushback or we get lack of response from people who are, obviously trying to, keep their funding from whether it be state or however, or local funding. So they're concerned about speaking out about legislation that impacts usually a small group of people, but the ones that are vilified and in recent years, trans people are the ones who are the targets of so many folks. And I think it's important to say, that when you send that message, you're not just sending a message that you don't like trans people. You don't probably like people because of the color of their skin. You don't like gay people either. And so, the folks who are enacting these kinds of laws, it sends a message overall that the place is not welcome, even if it's targeting a small group of people. And so I think it's important to speak out about those things. And also speak out, like I said, about ordinances, about, policy changes that are tangible. Like the local non-discrimination ordinances. Polly and I have worked on hate crimes here in Mississippi because Mississippi doesn't have a fully inclusive fully inclusive hate crime law that includes sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. Whereas the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Act at the federal level does. That was signed into law in 2009 by President Obama and passed with bipartisan support. We've been trying to do that here in Mississippi.
We won't tell them we've been unsuccessful.
We have been unsuccessful. But I will say that we have had every year, we have had Republicans and Democrats sponsor that and express support. And I think we would have probably gotten that through if we just had sexual orientation and gender, and disability, Polly. Where I get pushback as always is on gender identity because, trans people are the folks who are targeted these days. And why that's important even more is because hate crimes have gone up in our country against LGBTQ plus people. And it's especially important, because, I talk about the LGBTQ plus spectrum. I'm a gay, white, educated man. I'm in a different place on the spectrum. There's privilege that exists there. I worry about being discriminated against. My trans Black female siblings worry about being killed. And we have had every year trans Black women who have been murdered in Mississippi, and their murders have been unsolved and also not been treated as a hate crime and or investigated as such. And so, there's that. I mean, people who don't want to come to Jackson, maybe we have a non-discrimination ordinance, but it's not safe for some people within the LGBTQ plus spectrum. So I'll stop there and let my colleagues here answer. But there, that's something I think, I hope tourism folks can really address and speak out about.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the intersection of tourism and this legislative advocacy. Polly, is there what we can help?
Right. And so people with disabilities enjoy certain protections, like you've probably heard of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which speaks to employment protections and other things like that. And then the Help America Vote Act also gave people with disabilities and our agency a charge that people with disabilities need to be able to vote in an accessible polling place. So I challenge you as you vote in a few weeks that you look around and see if somebody in a chair could access the polling place. And then once they get in there, if somebody needed assistance or they couldn't use what you're using to vote, is there an accessible voting machine, curbside voting? So all of the protection and advocacy all over the country are charged with making sure people with disabilities have access to voting. So your P&A is doing the work. Our agency here in Mississippi has chosen to focus on our county that's in the capital city because we have a lot of hiccups to making sure that people with disabilities, number one, know where they're going to vote, and number two, have access to it. So I think, again, noticing where the gap is for people with disabilities, and it's just an awareness thing. And then you're talking about legislation in your own community, whether it's about travel or anything else, stay involved. Every now and then pay attention to your county supervisors meeting, which here they're quite entertaining. So stay involved in that, and so that you know what's coming up next, whether it's building a sidewalk or building a building that needs accessibility stuff. It's all about being involved.
Thank you. Marty?
Yeah, for Black travel specifically, legislation is a conversation that gets tougher and tougher in certain destinations. Obviously, everybody is aware of what happened in the state that I'm in right now, where their governor removed all Black history, anything, and books. And it wasn't damaging to us until, which this is always very controversial when I say that, until the NAACP put out the travel ban to the state of Florida. And for us, that directed me so much, because I'm like, okay, well, for one, I'm now conflicted because obviously I'm Black and they're telling people don't come here. But secondly, because I don't agree with it. And why don't I agree with it? Well, my whole existence in being, specifically with the products that I have in the travel industry, has always been to uplift Black-owned businesses. So now if you are promoting a ban like that, but you don't give any solutions or resources, now how are those Black-owned businesses affected? For example, in Miami, there is a historically Black neighborhood called Historic Overtown. They rely on tourism. So all of a sudden you're telling Black people don't come through there. Well, that means that Kristen Kitchen at the Duns Josephine Hotel doesn't get those heads and beds like she needs. There are 5 Black-owned hotels in Miami alone, and that means now that you're telling people not to come here, when if any of you guys saw the 2020 Black Traveler study that Black Travel Alliance did along with the National Coalition of Black Meeting Planners, NABHOOD, and MMGY Global, it told you that Florida was one of the top states. So it made us go into action. I remember during this whole ban, I was working with Jacksonville on multiple products they had just put in to not only support the African-American community that was coming in, but to support their local African-American community and drive more walking tourism into certain areas that have been historically ignored. And so when something like that comes out, it makes it a really, really big issue. However, the way that it was combated on multiple levels was Black organizations removed themselves from having their conferences in Florida, right? Which means now it took the dollars out of the whole state's pockets, but also Black organizations decide to stay and have their conferences in Florida. So one of the things that Omega Sci-Fi did is they went into the belly of the beast, as they say, and they started just leaving Black history books on the sidewalks in those little public libraries that you have, so that when people walk by, they could take it. Because no, it wasn't in the schools, but it was on the streets. And so it's something to think about when you do go through legislation that affects the community that you represent. How can you now go in and advocate and have activism that won't get you put into jail, but also that allows you to still speak freely and do what you need to do. So that is one way that it has affected us. And we know that other, states will follow suit, but that's okay. We continue to, come together and figure out the best solutions, but it's not always an easy thing to navigate. And for anybody who doesn't realize how much legislation affects tourism, it does on every single, in every single way. And so even though you might feel like you can't do much, you can. And it's just figuring out those ways to come together with other people and make sure you're advocating for those people who it's directly affecting.
Yeah, I love that. I agree wholeheartedly with Florida. I did a tour there, Black History or Black Cultural Heritage Tour, and there's so much Black history there. And I was like, well, if we're going to boycott it because the Black history isn't being taught, you can go to all these tourism activations, these tour guides, and learn the Black history yourself and choose where you spend your money. Like, yeah, boycotts, not into them. My next question is the one we've kind of been alluding around. How do you find the intersection of different facets of identity or different intersectional identities influencing your work? And what could we be more aware of to consider these issues? And this is really open to whoever wants to go first.
I can start. So it's really interesting. I love this question. So I sit on the board for NOLS, which stands for the National Outdoor Leadership School. And they are one of the oldest organizations that gets people into the outdoors with all of these amazing courses and things that I would never do. And I always tell them, I don't know why you guys have me here, because I'm not hiking through the Himalayas for 4 weeks, right? When there's a snowstorm and potential avalanches. However, when I go through training with them, because they want to start going into urban areas and recruiting from HBCUs or recruiting, Native American leaders when they have their Alaska courses, there's a lot of things that I tell them you have to realize, because it's more than just black and white. It's more than just household income. It's more than just sexual preference. It's more than just ability or differently abled. And so one of the examples that I gave them was they wanted to do a leadership training for people who have been in the foster care system. I said, okay, but what does that actually mean? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, one thing that people have to understand about foster care children is that historically, they did not know when food was coming. So they have a tendency to hoard food. And I said, here, you teach rationing food. People have to go into the food area. They have to, measure how much is which. They're carrying 60 pounds on their back. So it's ounces and ounces. But if you have a child who's been through a foster care program and now it's your 7th day and you're hiking through the wilderness up in Montana and you realize this person isn't eating, are you realizing why? For them, it's a survival mode. It's a survival tactic. And they go, oh my gosh, we never thought about it. I know you haven't, because this is not something that directly affects you. But when you talk about intersectionality, that could be a white kid, a Native American kid, an Asian kid, a Mexican kid, a black kid, a black adult, right? But you understanding how they grew up, is a direct factor of that. Understanding what things people have access to, and then being able to come back and put that into your plans. And so intersectionality is so much more than color. And again, like obviously everybody here is of that mindset, but remember that when you're advocating or when you're speaking about intersectionality, you're letting people know, like, this is what it includes, X, Y, and Z, right? I remember there was also a lady who spoke about being a single mom and being in their programs and what that meant for single mothers, because you can't be away from your kids that long, right? So is there an opportunity for them to still learn these skills or wilderness medicine, but where do their kids go? So it's intersectionality that affects you on every single part of it. And what I encourage people to do is, like Rob was saying before, there's so many ways he can identify with. Think about all of the ways you identify with, and now think about all the ways you don't, and put that into all of your plans. So I'm a Black female who has all of my senses. So I'm able-bodied. I'm straight, and I don't know what else I can say. I come from a middle class. So now if there's a Black woman who's not able-bodied, who does not come from the middle class, what is something that she goes through? And that's what I'm saying, like, it's always going to be about awareness, privilege, and bias, right? How does that affect us with people who don't look like us? I don't go through the same thing that Polly goes through, but that doesn't mean that what Polly goes through is less important than what I go through, right? And it's understanding people who don't look like you and all the things that they go through and being top of mind awareness about their situations, especially when it comes to intersectionality. And I hope that answered the question. I feel like I gave like a roundabout answer, but hopefully that answered it.
Great. It was great. Thank you.
And I think things can be even more complicated or compounded when you're in more than one of these marginalized groups. And so a person with a disability, we get federal dollars. And so we have to do demographics and all this stuff. And Rob, I can't remember if I talked to you about this, but our national network got all up in arms because we were going to have to start gathering data on somebody's gender identity. And we didn't want to ask that question to people. And the federal government was saying, but we need to know that of how many people with disabilities might identify that way. And so, of course, we lost that fight and we have to collect that data. But it can be offensive to some people when, you know, you're asking them these questions like that. But for us, the intersection is more it compounds the problem that we might be facing because we stand on the shoulders of the civil rights movement, on the transgender movement. So we rely on the successes and the failures that we've seen in those groups. But I think if you identify more than one of these squares, then things get compounded for you.
I'll add, you know, I've already kind of alluded to it, and I think both Marty and Polly have as well. But you know, the LGBTQ, when you're talking about, you know, all the letters of the spectrum, you know, we're not a monolith, and you know, we all come from different places. What we call that, and what Polly and Marty have already referred to, is we call it, you know, being multiply marginalized. You know, if you're a person of color who's LGBTQ plus, you're multiply marginalized. You have a whole different experience, or a certain different experience than I as a gay white male. Or if you're a person with a disability, or a person of color with a disability who's LGBTQ plus, you know, certainly you're multiply marginalized. So, you know, it's important for me. You know, I talk to people all the time who are straight, and they see the plight of our community, and they will say, well, what can I do? And I say, well, be an ally. And you don't have to spend any money to do that. You don't have to go to, you know, up to the Capitol. You can do that at the grocery store. You can do it at church or wherever you worship, you know, to say, you know, I know people who are LGBTQ plus. I know their experience, and I don't feel that way, and stand up against that wherever you are in life. So there's that, and I have to be an ally. I have to be an ally to all my siblings within the LGBTQ plus spectrum, and all the different ways that we come to that. There's certainly a lot that we share, but there's a lot that we don't share. So to understand that, you know, I think that when we think about in our organization, that we've really tried lately to make travel to events equitable for folks, so that everybody, even if it's, you know, making sure that we have a Zoom experience like this, or making sure that people have the kind of funds that they need to be able to travel. Then, you know, because not everybody's able to, not everybody, again, that's another thing. If you're, you know, certainly poor, you are also, that's, you know, an LGBTQ plus, that's another way of being multiply marginalized. So there's all kinds of ways, but yeah, I think it is just really important to think about how our work intersects. And certainly, you know, Polly and I have, like I said, experienced that with our shared advocacy around updating our hate crime in Mississippi. And so, yeah, I don't know if much to add. I think that you've all answered that very well, and I'll probably think of things I should have said later.
That was great conversation. I find that intersectionality is a good opening for those folks that might be pushing back against this work. You know, once you help them see the spectrum of identities and who has privilege and who's in the power, there's some part of their identity somewhere that they don't feel like they're the one in power, that they might feel marginalized, whether it's language or income, you know, nationality. I find it to be a good opening for folks. And once they, I mean, Marty, like you said, like we all said, when you know someone, it brings it home when you know someone experiencing this. Do we, well, I want to see first if there's any questions. Let's kind of checking the chat. Ronnie, did we see any questions in here? I see some great resources.
I've seen comments and resources. I haven't seen necessarily
Okay.
questions.
So we do want to we want to have some time for you all to share resources with us, because that was
The
important.
Jonna has her hand raised though, so.
Okay. Yeah. And
Hey,
if you want to go,
sorry,
no.
I'm driving. If I have a question, if it's okay.
Yes, please.
For each of the panelists, I think thank you all for just sharing all of that you shared during this hour. But what I wanted to have a quick question is like, what do you feel like is
Whoop, you're breaking up a little bit.
organizations that were with? Oh, sorry. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, try again.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
So what is your greatest challenge, and how can the people on this call that are listening help you with those challenges?
Thank you. Did y'all hear that?
Yes, that was a great question. The biggest challenge is others holding people accountable. Like, they know I'm the girl who's gonna hold them accountable. People see me, honey, they turn around and walk the other way. They're like, here comes Marty, everything we put on 2020, she about to be asking us what we did. And I'm like, it takes more than me. And like I told Nels last week, don't put that diversity statement on our website if you're not going to keep the same energy and do what you say you're going to do, because guess who's going to be knocking at the president's door? Me, right? But I don't want to be the only one advocating for all of us. So that's an issue that I have within your own organizations. I will ask all of you to go back and look at those statements and make sure people are keeping the same energy. You said you were going to do X, Y, and Z by this much because you added a goal, a target, so that we can measure it, and you've done 0%. What are the next steps to be able to do that? The other thing that I will ask y'all to do is, if you say you're advocates, mean it. Like I say all the time, this is not something that you can turn on and off. This is a 24/7. This is a 24/7 job, right? It's not today you're this and tomorrow you're not. No, when you hear the terrible things that are being said, correct the behavior. When you see the terrible things that are being done, correct the behavior. Like this, right? Nothing is wrong with this at all. This is great. But if somebody who was visually who could not hear, how would they be able to hear what we're saying, right? So now it's like, okay, for the next time, what is the resource that we can have to make sure that anybody who can't hear, or I don't know why I can't think of the word for it. I want to say visually, but I'm like, that's my eyes. But somebody who is, what do you call that?
Hearing
Audibly?
impaired. Yeah.
Hearing, thank
Yeah,
you. I
hearing.
don't know why I couldn't get that out. But for somebody who's hearing impaired, what's the thing that we can do? And this is a problem we have all the time with Black Tribe Alliance. I'm also a content creator, and I have to remind myself, you need to put in captions because somebody needs to be able to hear what you're saying. So it's just making sure that we are also being the leaders in that space and doing what, we said we're going to do, but making sure other people do it as well.
And the good thing about Zoom is they do have captions, so somebody with the hearing impairment can enable captions for themselves. So that's why we opt for Zoom most of the time, is because it's more, it's easier for people with hearing impairments. And I would add to what, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Marty. I just jumped in. I would add to what Marty said is, help people be self-advocates. I think when you're in a marginalized community, sometimes and I don't want to generalize, but you're not going to push. And so I think that we all are those pushers, but help people and give them tools so that they can do it for themselves too, because we're not always going to be there for those people.
You can join HRC. We love to for you to do that. HRC, I will say this too, that all of our resources on our website at www.hrc.org. We have our foundation side, that's the C3 side, and then we have our C4 side, our policy and advocacy side and campaign side. So, there's lots of things there. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think, again, I agree with what Marty said, and I've already said it as well, be an ally wherever you can. And look, I think racist language, transphobic language is normalized in this campaign, or among, people who are, some people who are running for office. And it's heartbreaking and it's infuriating. But it's not where the rest of the country is. Most people think that it's already illegal to fire people because of their sexual orientation and gender identity. Well, it's perfectly legal in plenty of states, and Mississippi included, or to deny service. So, get involved in the process. Get to know trans people. I was so ignorant before I came into this job. You know, I mean, not completely ignorant, certainly sympathetic, but knowing the stories of folks, can really help you. It can help change your mind, but it also can help you to be the advocate that you need to be.
Thank you. Do y'all have any other resources you want to share with us either in the chat or verbally if you don't have your chat together?
I'm gonna link to some templates that I used to do with some brands that I would do diversity and training for, and it's just your own version of a diversity scorecard. It doesn't have to be diversity in travel, but you can change it to equity in legislation. You can change it to whatever you want to, but I'll just drop it here. It's a Canva link. Again, it's a public link, so you can make your own copy and then go in and change it. But I encourage everybody to take this type of thing back to whatever organizations that you're working within so that you guys can grade yourselves and see, where some things can change, what you have the opportunity and what I call low-hanging fruit to make a difference in. But also as you go out and you guys start, being consultants or helping somebody with something, feel free to use that and make them grade themselves. Because again, the first part is always going to be awareness. When you know better, you do better. Or at least when you know better, you can't say that you didn't know because we graded ourselves. So yeah, I just invite everybody to use that. But Dr. Ramona LaRouche is on the call also. She is a researcher over at the African American Research Library and Community Center, where we have one of our events that just got canceled on Thursday. That's okay. But she put resources in here. Vinci put resources in here. Vinci, I'll ask you to drop it again so it's closer to where people can see. Dr. Ramona, your resources, I'll ask you to drop them in here as well. And if anybody has something, just populate the chat and then we could, I guess, pull them and create a list of resources to send out. But yeah, there is so much. But I think, Ronnie, you guys do a great job and constantly being able to provide the resources as well.
Marty Nyasha had a question. I hope I pronounced that right. Asking if are you open to allowing that to be translated?
Girl, you can take that and put it in any language you want to. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm telling y'all, she is fantastic. Like the work that she's doing in South America. Like all praises to you, Nye, seriously. I tell her that all the time, but I'm telling you publicly in front of everybody because she is the glue that's connecting everybody.
All right. Any other questions?
I will say, Tami, there is a documentary on Netflix about the disability revolution. It's called Crip Camp. I hate the name of it, but it's a good historical perspective of how we moved from a child not in a wheelchair, not being able to go to school, to that same person not being able to teach school because they're in a wheelchair, to, great stuff. So, so anyway, hate the title. It's not the most exciting movie you'll ever see on Netflix, but it's a good history.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
These are some great resources. Thank you. And what a great conversation. Some folks are putting their LinkedIn handles in the chat. Let's keep all connected, because this is how we're stronger together. And thank you so much for everybody, our speakers and everybody, for your time and your willingness to share and the work that you do every day. And thank you to Tribble Unity for creating this safe space and inspiring space for these important conversations. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Tami. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Marty.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Holly. This was truly incredible. What amazing conversation. And I'm so glad that everyone is connecting in the chat right now, because as you said, Tami, I mean, we're stronger together. So this is really special. Thank you so much for making the time, making the space, and filling this space with all of this, I mean, information, guidance, connection, because that's what we're here for. That's what we want to see. That's what we want to be a part of. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for helping us put on this summit and to be able to create this space for all of us to get together. Thank you, Offbeat, Tribble, Pick LJ, Miles Partnership, Visit Greater Palm Springs, Explore Brookhaven, and Visit Lauderdale. We appreciate you, and we appreciate the energy that you put into helping us do the work that we do with all of you. In addition to tomorrow's summit, we always have lots of opportunities for everyone to keep engaging and keep this momentum going with us. We have our inaugural awards dinner. I know I see a lot of nominees in the room today for different awards. We will have our inaugural awards dinner in early December in New York City, where we will be able to celebrate all of these DEI trailblazers who are doing so much work in this space and with this community, as well as raise for an upcoming generation, for the next generation of travel leaders, for a program that we are launching to help to work with high school students to give them real world access to the world of travel and tourism. Our honoree Stacy Ritter was actually on one of our panels yesterday, and it'll be a great opportunity to connect with everyone in this room. So we hope you'll all attend. We also have our certified DEI travel professional credential coming up in early November. We've created a more flexible option to be able to really get into some of the material that we cover in that course that will hopefully be a bit more suitable based on budgets and timeline. So please reach out if you're interested in this for someone, for yourself, for someone in your organization. And you know, this work, we appreciate any support, any donation that you can provide to help us continue doing this work. Brian, if you can pull up the next slide as well with the information about tomorrow. Please do join us tomorrow as well. I think you all in your, when you registered for today, you would have received all of the links for the summit this week. Tomorrow we have our friends from the Coragio group and from Visit Detroit who will be joining us to do a session on why DEI still matters for DMOs and how to engage your community in the work. Really excited to join the session, and hope you all will join us there. And then after that, Ronnie himself will be leading a panel, leading a discussion on how we struggle with some of the hard questions in DEI. So we hope you'll all be able to join us for our final session tomorrow from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you again so much for joining us. It's a very special, very changing time that we get to share with everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.